Welcome back. If you're new here, I am David Caldicott. I wrote a novel called Time Not Here. It is available on Amazon. If you can't afford it but would like to read it, please send me a message and I'll send you an ebook copy of it for free. I'm also reading out the novel from start to finish on my YouTube channel and posting it to Facebook and I believe TikTok as well. There's plenty of places for you to enjoy or learn from the content of this novel. It means quite a lot to me. It represents a significant growth experience for me, and so I'm really glad to be able to share that with others. Here we go, chapter number 13. The depression continued. This time he just let it happen. Having decided to join Celeste and find out for himself what this Kimber thing was all about, there was little point in trying to push against the depression in the meantime. He did keep the sadness confined to his home life though, going to work as normal, doing the job as he should until returning to the safety of his room, only then letting the misery flow out. As usual, he'd arrive home, pick up a bottle of scotch and turn on the computer, spending the next few hours watching video after video on the cursed YouTubes. It's not really YouTube, he wrote in his journal, it's them tube. We watch hours and hours of other people doing things we wish we were brave enough, smart enough, strong enough to do ourselves. For the few who have the guts to make their own shows, it's a showcase for opportunity and success. For the many, like me, it's a platform for envy. At least watching the success of others activated the mirror neurons that Daniel had learned about, of course, from a YouTube lecture. He would get the feeling that it was him that had accomplished something. Something like flying a wingsuit down a mountain, or giving a presentation on the merits of small government, or cooking an elaborate meal of sausages and lentils. Something more than sitting alone every night, drowning himself with whiskey and trying to understand how he could have been such a damn fool to have fallen into a psychopath's net. But the mirrored feeling of accomplishment is far removed from what it takes to actually accomplish something. A truth Daniel was starting to realize. For the time being, in the aftermath of this war of wits, forgiveness was required for his lack of activity and self-deprecating attitude. If forgiveness was unavailable, suicide would be inevitable. It had never been something he'd considered seriously before, suicide. He was firm in the conviction that this life is the only one I've got, that there is definitely no afterlife, heaven or hell, reincarnation, or joining the eternal spaghetti monster in the sky. This all kept him from taking too seriously the idea of throwing away such a valuable thing as his one life, however miserable, when it is such a rare and honorable endowment. But had it been? Sure, he had lots of memories of fun that he had, climbing mountains, clubbing until dawn with people he had considered friends, meeting with CEOs and multimillionaires, but he was miserable the entire time. He was either taking large amounts of ketamine, large amounts of whiskey, or large amounts of cheap takeout food in evenings that were no different from the ones he had now, just different houses and avoiding different problems. Just as much YouTube, just as much learning, just as much wasting his supposedly precious time. If it took the earth-shattering realization that his best friend was a psychopath to finally force Daniel to re-examine his life and figure out why the fuck he had been sabotaging it for so many years, at least some good could come out of this time with Lathe. Knowing his luck, even if Kimber did help, even if it gave him a way out of the psychological fallout, chances are the maniac would come back one day and try to take his life just at the moment he had reclaimed it. It was convenient then that the Kimber ceremony would take place just a few weeks before the end of tenancy. Daniel decided that not only would he move out of the house at the end of the contract, but he would leave town altogether and never come back, removing the chance that Lathe could ever track him down. Maybe Norwich. That was a nice city, lots of culture, lots of great architecture, suitable for a fresh start. A sprawling and hilly city on the south side of the estuary of the Severn River, it had as much local history as York, but with slightly warmer weather and an altogether different flavor of residence. There were few people he knew in Norwich, who he had met when he lived in Great Yarmouth, as it was close and he would often drive over to visit. He remembered his brief friendship with a Russian man he had met at the climbing gym in Norwich, brief due to Daniel's carelessness with words, accidentally freaking the man out during a conversation about psychology. I believe that inside everybody's head, it's not just one personality, but dozens, like hundreds even. The full variety of thought is up there in the space of potential, but only the ones that fit the current situation or align with certain conditions will actually come through to the surface and then get acted upon or noticed, he had explained. What do you mean? Asked Dmitri, looking very confused. Well, say right now, for example, in my head are probably all kinds of potential thoughts, ranging from, oh, I should stand up, or, oh, I should say something else, right through to the more extreme things like, should I punch Dmitri, or should I give him a hug? They're all there, but only a few get taken seriously. I'm your friend, so I don't want to hurt you or jeopardize our friendship, so other areas of my values and beliefs stop the thought of punching you from surfacing. The people that actually do punch, he continued, are the ones who don't have the same values or beliefs, and so those thoughts do get heard and then dominate. In their case, the thoughts about being kind to strangers don't get much attention, by comparison. By this point, Dmitri was frowning, and it took a long time for Daniel to realize that he had just given the impression that he was thinking about hugging this Russian. Of course, he wasn't. It was just an extreme example to emphasize the point, but it was too late to backtrack. His awkward reaction had already made the moment weird. That was the last he saw of Dmitri, who in his Eastern European conservatism promptly stopped taking his calls. Misunderstandings were a constant theme in Daniel's life. He'd spent hours studying communication theory and trying to get better at both interpreting other people correctly and also expressing himself correctly. But we are a species that has not yet mastered the art of perfect communication, if such a thing was possible. For Daniel, it most certainly was not. He now realized that his inability to understand other people's intentions was precisely why Lathe had found it so easy to manipulate him. He would simply say something confidently enough, and Daniel would just take his word for it. No questions, no doubt. Lathe just spoke with such certainty that it was actually refreshing in a world of half-truths and self-contradictions. More than refreshing. Intoxicating. This is, he could see, the way that people in positions of power command the masses so easily, manipulate half-truths spoken with such confidence that no one questions them. Tell the people that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and they'll believe you. Tell them that you care about their welfare and livelihood, and they won't notice the legislation you pass that restricts their freedom and increases only their own power. If YouTube had no language contained within its content, be it visual, spoken, or artistic, it would hold no power over the evenings of the depressed and self-loathing. Daniel always thought money was the root of power, yet Lathe had none to speak of. No. Language. That is the root of power. In quiet moments between shifts or lying in bed trying to sleep, Daniel continued to reflect on his childhood, looking for explanations for how he had been so gullible and why he felt like such a coward. That day with Ethan and the mouse kept coming up. He felt like he was missing something, an important hidden detail that, upon discovery, would put the whole thing into context and help him cast off the residual effects. No matter how hard he tried, though, he couldn't fit the pieces together. When he had reached his wit's end, he decided to ask the one person who might be able to offer insight on what happened all those years ago. So you know that day with Ethan and the mouse? Yes, his mother interrupted. I actually wanted to talk to you about that. After you told me the truth about what happened, I remembered something very strange from my own childhood that I wanted to share with you. Okay. Daniel thought he knew everything about his mother's childhood. He had heard all the stories dozens of times. Well, when I was about 6, my sister and I were playing in the garden and we found this little white mouse who'd been trapped between 2 paving slabs. Somehow he'd gotten in there, but he hadn't been able to crawl back out. We thought we'd rescue it, so my sister lifted up the stone slab, which was heavy, and I tried to help her. As we lifted, the little mouse ran to the space we'd just created directly under the slab. Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. Well, the stone was heavy, and my sister suddenly let go, leaving me to hold the whole weight. She watched me struggle and shout without comment, her eyes fixed on my face. I held for a few seconds, but couldn't keep it up. It fell, and it crushed the poor thing. Oh my God. Daniel lost all sense of where he was. Are you serious? Yes, that's what happened. I'd long forgotten about it, but when you told me about Ethan, it suddenly reminded me. I thought about it and I realized that my relationship with my sister took a turn for the worst after that. Maybe I blamed her for the mouse's death and just didn't want to be around her as much. Maybe, Daniel stared at the wall. What are the chances that two people both experience the death of a mouse at the hands of a fallen brick at the age of 6, let alone two people that are blood related? I know you don't believe in all this stuff, his mother started, but I believe that things happen for a reason, according to God's plan, or whatever you want to call it. Maybe I was supposed to learn a lesson, my moment with the mouse. Maybe the fact that I didn't cause the event to repeat itself with my child, like a second attempt kind of thing. As much as he hated to think it, he was starting to agree. What if there was some kind of purpose to it all? He got to thinking about the ideas of reincarnation, which he'd so quickly have rejected just a few months ago. He thought about the biblical concept that the sins of the father repeat themselves in his children, which he assumed was due to the education said father would give to the children. But this repeated sin, failing to save the life of a mouse, couldn't possibly have a rational or materialistic explanation, other than just saying it was coincidence. But what a coincidence! Ethan and the mouse was turning out to be more important than he thought, so he let his thoughts run out loud as he shared with his mother. You know, I've had this recurring, dream or sensation. It's really hard to describe. It's like a darkness, a heavy, heavy darkness that just makes my whole body feel like it's being crushed from every angle. I've felt this feeling every now and then for years, sometimes during dreams, sometimes just randomly during the day. It only lasts a few moments and it doesn't hurt, but it makes me feel very uncomfortable. That's strange. What are you thinking? She asked. Well, I remember one day with my first girlfriend, Sophie. You remember Sophie. She put her finger up to my lips like you would do a shush to somebody to make them to shut up. And the feeling of her finger very lightly touching my lips like that suddenly brought up that weird heavy darkness again. Very mildly, but it was noticeable. Ever since then, if I put my fingers up to my lips like this, I still get that mild feeling, almost nostalgically. Like it's a feeling I know well, and that's been with me forever. That's fascinating, Daniel. His mother had been the primary source of his curiosity with the inner workings of the brain. Do you think it's related to Ethan and the mouse? It might be. I mean, imagine me as a little 6-year-old confronted with this stone slamming down onto the mouse, my little mirror neurons firing and feeling the pain of that mouse as its body was crushed. Maybe the pain was just too much for me to deal with, and so I entered a sort of dissociated state that was dark and heavy, like you were being crushed from every angle. As he heard those words, a flood of emotion washed over him. A surge of energy rising from his toes to the top of his head. A tingling feeling that younger versions of him would attribute to a cold breeze and not think too much about. A long silence fell as Daniel tried to gauge his emotions. He slipped into a deep calm, as if someone he cared about had just told him they loved him and meant it. Forgiveness, he said after a few moments. That's what this is all about. That's what all these years of self-sabotage and drug abuse have been about. I'm trying to forgive my 6-year-old self for letting Ethan do what he did. He told his mother about much of his struggles in life, including the drugs, but had shared nothing of the last year with Laith. It was still too sensitive. To himself, he finished the idea. That's why Laith was able to manipulate me so much. by playing on that inability I have to forgive myself. His mother's Christian perspective was desperate to chime in about the forgiveness offered by her Christ. She held her tongue, though, before sending him a hug over the phone and calling off. As he reflected on the inside, he lay down on the floor, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't been able to forgive himself for not caring enough about his degree, so he got depressed. He hadn't been able to forgive himself for a failed business for which he had nothing to show for his efforts, so he got depressed again. He hadn't been able to forgive himself for letting a psychopath enter his life and almost murder him, so he got depressed again. If Kimber is going to do anything of value, he thought, it will show me how to forgive myself for all these catastrophes. Psychedelic experiences, Daniel discovered after many hours of research, seemed to be at the root of much of the world's religions and spiritual practices. Whether drug-induced or as a result of 40 days spent wandering in a desert without food or water, the psychedelic state of mind can be seen as the same, a place free from the boundaries of regular thought. A place where the programs we've learned throughout our lives to protect ourselves, hurt ourselves, or simply try and get through it all without falling apart are uninstalled, for long enough that new software can be written, for revelation to occur. Some researchers argued that the burning bush of Moses was actually an acacia bush high in the potent hallucinogenic DMT, the same active compound of the ayahuasca brew. Others suggest that the fabled Eleusinian mysteries of the ancient Greeks was in fact a psychedelic drug den where diplomats, politicians, and philosophers would be given advanced knowledge of life and the world after consuming a psychoactive potion. Why this seemed to be the case was still a mystery to Daniel. He had assumed when he lost his faith that the stories in religious texts were simply myths, told to scare people into following a totalitarian religious despot. They were about population control, the suppression of individual liberty, and the metaphysical equivalent of saying that terrorists want to take our freedoms. There's nothing of value to learn from those fanciful stories, written by dusty cave dwellers, right? Yet, here he was, entertaining the possibility that an ethereal reincarnation of events took place between himself and his mother, seriously considering the idea that hallucinations of face morphing might be more than a quirk of the brain, that the universe might be a simulation, and the psychic phenomena might actually exist in a strange kind of way. The role of the psychedelic experience was clearly a major one in human history, though the reason for it was as elusive as the wind. Perhaps, he thought, he would find out for himself when he takes Kimber, if he could survive the journey. He looked up and saw the green flatlands of the Dutch countryside whizzing past, windmills and old churches flying by his viewpoint in a double-decker train carriage. The train pulled in and Daniel was met by a tall, bold man who introduced himself as Joseph, the Kimber ceremonies facilitator. They walked together to a dirty van with blacked-out windows in the station car park. There was no passenger seat, ripped out and replaced with piles of steel rods. Daniel had to sit on a cushion in the back of the van, dark and alone. When the van finally stopped, he climbed out and walked into a 7-story apartment building that had the look of a Soviet-era concrete monstrosity of brutalism. Where the fuck are we going? When they reached the room, it was filthy. A few dirty mattresses were strung around and the stench of vomit and excrement filled his nostrils. Joseph passed him a small white pill, which looked no different to an aspirin tablet from a general pharmacy. Daniel looked around, figured he'd come this far, so couldn't exactly back out now, and took the pill. Hours passed as he lay on the stench-filled mattress. Nothing. He felt nothing. As he grew more and more frustrated at having spent hundreds of pounds to come to this crappy apartment and take an aspirin pill, he eventually sat up and asked Joseph why nothing was happening. "It will work," Joseph replied. "Just give it time." From the door, he could hear a familiar voice. It was Celeste. She was talking to Joseph, said something in his ear, and then laughed as Joseph handed her a small envelope. She opened it and counted the money inside. "Celeste, what's going on?" Just lie down, Dan. Stop worrying. Trust me. He lay back down and waited for so long that he ended up falling asleep. When he woke, Joseph handed him his bag and said, "Thank you for your business. Enjoy your life." "What?" Daniel demanded, furious. "All this waiting, all this preparation for this?" He felt his heart race, his palms moistening. Rage filled every inch of his body. He was ready to demand his money back when Joseph pulled out a small pistol and pointed it at his forehead. "Get out." Suddenly, he woke in his floor bed, back in York. Covered in sweat and panting heavily, he slowly accepted that it was a dream, then pulled out his journal to write in his dream log. Maybe it was his subconscious trying to remind him of the need to be careful when taking a drug with a stranger. That he'd better be prepared to walk away if he didn't like the look of the place. And was Celeste really the kind, warm person I thought she was? Was that just an act? Like lathes? He lay back down and stared at the ceiling for a while before falling back to sleep. Thank you very much for holding space for me to share with you chapter 13 of my novel, Time Not Here. It's been an honor, a pleasure. Take care of yourself, take care of your family, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.